Hi, this is Nick Barrett from Pendragon and you are watching Morrow.com. It's actually all about misplaced passion. It's all about how we start off doing things with great intentions and then they go completely off the rails. It's also about lots of aspects of different kinds of passion, like our drive to do things that pushes us forward. And I think a lot of that comes from taking risks and being disappointed with things. You can use that as fuel. You can use negative energy to push you forward. And that is what can really give you your passion. It has for me for the last couple of albums, because I felt that we were losing our way a little bit musically and in the music business when we had the long period of time off, and being out in that wilderness reactivated a great deal of passion in me to really come back all blazing, all guns blazing, to try and make it work again. So that's pretty much the theme of the album. As I said, the other side of it is misplaced passion, like for example how religion first started out as something very spiritual, and it was about a relationship with some kind of God, whatever God that might be, and now how it's turned into almost a business. You know, I mean, the Vatican's one of the richest businesses around. You know, it's kind of bizarre how it's moved away from what it was. And presidents, you know, Barack Obama, when he first came in, was going to do this, going to do that, and people saw him as the great new hope and the first black president, and now it's just sort of gone back to the normal crap that it's always been. Yeah, I mean, you know, when Genesis, this is the thing about this, you know, I mean, I love Camel, Genesis and Pink Floyd. As far as I'm concerned, the rest of progressive rock is not really that interesting until, apart from Marillion, until the last maybe 10 years, when I think some interesting bands came along again. And the thing is, now we're doing now what bands like Genesis and Pink Floyd did 40, 35 years ago. You know, when Pink Floyd were writing music 35 years ago, they were using all sorts of different sounds, they were experimenting with all sorts of things. I mean, people weren't coming up to Genesis then, you know, back in the 70s and saying, yeah, I'd prefer it if you sounded a little bit like ragtime jazz, you know. At 30 years before that, you know, they were doing what they were doing then. So it's really weird now that people say, oh yeah, you know, we prefer you do the kind of music that was around 30 years ago. It was kind of, it's irrelevant. And now I think, you know, it's important for us to play the music that is relevant now, using all the sort of different influences that are around now, all the different sounds that are available now, you know. And I like what was around 30 years ago when we would use that but as an influence, but we don't want to keep replaying that sound. I wrote it all at home, and I wrote some of it in Devon, and I wrote some of it in the Orkney Islands when I was there, but most of it was written at my house.
Okay, you don't compose when you're on your trips around?
Sometimes, you know, I mean, the trips, I went to Orkney Islands to compose, but quite often when you do that, not very much happens. You know, you get some kind of refreshing holiday, but, you know, after 5 days you tend not to have very much. I took all the musical equipment and did some writing when I was there. The same as when I was in Devon, I did some writing there as well. But most of it is written at home. I mean, the inspiration doesn't just come from being in wonderful places. It can come from being like in a place like this. You know, a horrible little old dressing room. You know, there's a kind of, and anywhere with an atmosphere creates inspiration. It hasn't got to be somewhere nice particularly. You know, you could write a lot of music being in the back streets of Swindon where I live. You know, just as much inspiration can come from that as could come from being in the mountains. Well, I mean, obviously Scott has helped a lot with the live shows, but in terms of the writing, I mean, because I write all the music and all the lyrics and all, I mean, everything you hear, all the keyboard melodies, sure. You know, I write all that, and a lot of the drum patterns, you know, the rhythms are already...
Don't you think about his way of playing when you write music into your computer?
I did with passion, not so much with pure. I thought of what Scott could do and incorporated that into the way of writing. But the real difference came was in 2003, where I got fed up with just this kind of music. I wanted to incorporate some other kind of sounds and influences, and I started to listen to a lot more heavy metal music and stuff like, you know, Rammstein or Foo Fighters or, you know, Deftones, which brought something else to rock music. And it was through that's where the change came, and it was just a coincidence that the drummer that we got was going to also be able to underpin that new kind of sound. It was almost like fate. It was going to happen. I got into more heavy metal music and more rock music and a harder edge music, and we happened to get a drummer who could play it. That was a very, almost like, you know, a magical thing that happened there. Well, it'd be nice to think so, that we're getting, I mean, what we are getting is we're getting a larger status within rock music, because, you know, I don't think we are what people would typically call progressive rock anymore. I mean, we don't, you know, go out sounding like Genesis. We've got Genesis as an influence, but we've got a lot of other influences as well. I mean, Pendragon's really more of a rock band now. You know, you come to one of our shows, you're going to get the same kind of feeling as you would if you experienced stuff like Foo Fighters. You know, it's kind of energetic, it's melodic, there's some slow stuff as well, but I don't think we're really... I don't want to be either. I don't want to be stuck in that 1970s noodling kind of progressive rock. I don't like that kind of music anyway. I don't really like bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I don't really like just endless soloing. That's why I like Genesis, because Tony Banks for me wrote melodies, not keyboard solos. He wrote tunes that were incredibly powerful tunes, and I like that. I didn't like just endless solos.
Take only what you need.